National Electrical Code, or NEC, provides requirements for installing service receptacles for outdoor air conditioning compressors. These requirements are primarily found in Article 210.63, specifically addressing the accessibility and location of the receptacle outlet. Article 210.63 mandates that a 125-volt single-phase 15 or 20 amp receptacle outlet must be installed at an accessible location for the servicing of heating, air conditioning, and refrigeration equipment. This receptacle should be located on the same premises as the equipment it serves. The purpose of this requirement is to provide a convenient and safe power source for service personnel to plug in tools and equipment when performing maintenance or repairs on the air conditioning compressor unit. Having a dedicated receptacle eliminates the need for extension cords running from distant outlets, which can pose safety hazards and create tripping hazards. When determining the accessible location for the receptacle, several factors should be considered. Firstly, the receptacle should be readily accessible, meaning it should not be obstructed by permanent structures, landscaping, or other obstacles that would prevent easy access. Secondly, the receptacle should be located within a reasonable distance of the air conditioning compressor unit. While the NEC does not specify an exact distance, it should be close enough to allow service personnel to easily reach the equipment with standard power cords. Typically, a distance of within 25 feet is considered reasonable. Thirdly, the receptacle should be protected from the elements to prevent damage and ensure safe operation. This can be achieved by using a weather-resistant receptacle cover or by locating the receptacle under an eave or other protective structure. In addition to Article 210.63, other sections of the NEC may also be relevant to the installation of service receptacles for air conditioning compressors. Article 440 covers air conditioning and refrigeration equipment and may contain additional requirements related to the wiring and protection of the equipment. Article 406.9 addresses receptacles in damp or wet locations and provides requirements for weather protection and grounding. When installing the receptacle, it is important to follow all applicable NEC requirements and local codes to ensure a safe and compliant installation. This includes using the correct wiring methods, providing proper overcurrent protection, and ensuring that the receptacle is properly grounded. It is also important to use a receptacle that is listed for outdoor use and is suitable for the environmental conditions in the area. For example, in areas with frequent rainfall or high humidity, a weather-resistant receptacle with a weatherproof cover is recommended. Furthermore, it is crucial to consider the specific requirements of the air conditioning compressor unit when selecting the receptacle. The receptacle should be rated for the voltage and amperage required by the equipment and should be compatible with the plug type used by the equipment. If the air conditioning compressor unit requires a 240-volt receptacle, a 125-volt receptacle will not be suitable. The installation should always comply with the manufacturer's instructions and recommendations for the air conditioning compressor unit. To summarize, the NEC requires a 125-volt single-phase 15 or 20 amp receptacle outlet to be installed at an accessible location for servicing heating, air conditioning, and refrigeration equipment. This receptacle should be located on the same premises as the equipment it serves and should be readily accessible within a reasonable distance of the equipment and protected from the elements. Other relevant sections of the NEC include Article 440 and Article 406.9. By following these requirements and local codes, you can ensure a safe and compliant installation. Always consult the latest edition of the NEC and local codes for the most up-to-date requirements. If you are not familiar with electrical codes and practices, it is recommended to hire a qualified electrician to perform the installation. A qualified electrician will have the knowledge and experience to ensure that the installation is safe, compliant, and reliable. In addition to the NEC requirements, it is also important to consider any local codes or regulations that may apply to the installation of service receptacles for air conditioning compressors. Local codes may have additional requirements or may amend the NEC requirements to reflect local conditions or practices. It is always best to check with the local building department or electrical inspector to determine the specific requirements for your area. When selecting the location for the service receptacle, It is also important to consider the safety of service personnel. The receptacle should be located in a well-lit area and should be free from obstructions that could create tripping hazards. The receptacle should also be located away from any potential hazards, such as sharp edges, moving parts, or hot surfaces. If possible, the receptacle should be located on a wall or other stable surface to prevent it from being damaged or dislodged. The receptacle should also be clearly labeled to identify its purpose and voltage. This can help prevent accidental use of the receptacle for other purposes and can alert service personnel to the correct voltage. The labeling should be durable and weather-resistant to ensure that it remains legible over time. When installing the wiring for the receptacle, it is important to use the correct wiring methods and materials. The wiring should be sized appropriately for the amperage rating of the receptacle and should be protected from physical damage. The wiring should also be properly grounded to prevent electrical shock hazards. It is recommended to use a dedicated circuit for the service receptacle to ensure that it has sufficient capacity and to prevent overloading the circuit. The circuit should be protected by a circuit breaker or fuse that is sized appropriately for the amperage rating of the receptacle and the wiring. When connecting the wiring to the receptacle, it is important to follow the manufacturer's instructions and to use the correct terminals. The wires should be securely fastened to the terminals to prevent them from loosening or coming disconnected. The receptacle should be securely mounted to the wall or other surface to prevent it from moving or coming loose. After the receptacle is installed, it should be tested to ensure that it is working properly and that it is properly grounded. This can be done using a receptacle tester or a multimeter. The receptacle tester will verify that the receptacle is wired correctly and that it is properly grounded. The multimeter can be used to measure the voltage at the receptacle and to verify that it is within the correct range. If any problems are detected during testing, they should be corrected immediately. It is also important to periodically inspect the service receptacle to ensure that it is in good condition and that it is working properly. The receptacle should be checked for any signs of damage, such as cracks, chips, or corrosion. The receptacle should also be checked to ensure that it is securely mounted and that the wiring is properly connected. If any problems are detected, they should be corrected immediately. By following these guidelines, you can ensure that the service receptacle for your air conditioning compressor is installed safely and correctly and that it will provide a reliable power source for service personnel. Remember to always consult the latest edition of the NEC and local codes for the most up-to-date requirements and to hire a qualified electrician if you are not familiar with electrical codes and practices. Now let's delve into some specific scenarios and considerations that might arise during the installation of these service receptacles. Firstly, consider the case where the air conditioning compressor unit is located on a rooftop. In such instances, the accessibility of the receptacle becomes paramount. The NEC requires that the receptacle be readily accessible, meaning that it should be reachable without requiring the removal of obstacles or the use of special tools. This could necessitate the installation of a dedicated access ladder or walkway to the rooftop, ensuring that service personnel can safely and easily reach the receptacle. Furthermore, the receptacle itself should be installed in a location that is protected from the elements, such as under an overhang or inside a weatherproof enclosure. This will prevent water damage and corrosion, which can compromise the safety and reliability of the electrical connection. Secondly, let's examine the situation where multiple air conditioning compressor units are located in close proximity to one another. In this case, a question arises whether a single service receptacle can serve multiple units. While the NEC does not explicitly prohibit this, it is generally recommended to install a separate receptacle for each unit. This ensures that each unit has its own dedicated power source, which can prevent overloading and minimize the risk of electrical problems. Additionally, having separate receptacles makes it easier for service personnel to work on individual units without affecting the operation of the other units. Thirdly, consider the scenario where the air conditioning compressor unit is located in a remote or difficult-to-reach location. In such cases, the use of a portable generator may be considered as an alternative to installing a permanent service receptacle. However, it is important to note that the use of a portable generator must comply with all applicable safety regulations and guidelines. The generator must be properly grounded, and the exhaust fumes must be vented away from occupied areas. Additionally, the generator must be sized appropriately for the load it will be powering, and it must be equipped with overload protection. Furthermore, it is essential to consider the potential for voltage drop when using a long extension cord to connect the generator to the air conditioning compressor unit. Voltage drop can reduce the performance of the equipment and can even damage it. To minimize voltage drop, it is recommended to use a heavy gauge extension cord and to keep the length of the cord as short as possible. Finally, let's address the issue of GFCI protection for service receptacles located outdoors. The NEC generally requires that all 125-volt single-phase, 15 and 20 amp receptacles located in damp or wet locations be protected by a ground fault circuit interrupter, or GFCI. This is to prevent electrical shock hazards in areas where there is a risk of exposure to moisture. However, there are some exceptions to this requirement. For example, GFCI protection is not required for receptacles that are used exclusively for dedicated appliances, such as air conditioning compressor units, provided that the receptacles are clearly labeled as such. Nevertheless, it is generally recommended to provide GFCI protection for all outdoor receptacles, regardless of whether they are used for dedicated appliances or not. This provides an additional layer of safety and can help to prevent electrical shock hazard. In conclusion, the installation of service receptacles for air conditioning compressor units requires careful planning and attention to detail. It is essential to comply with all applicable NEC requirements and local codes, and to consider the specific needs and circumstances of each installation. By following these guidelines, you can ensure that the service receptacle is installed safely, correctly, and reliably, and that it will provide a convenient and safe power source for service personnel. Always remember that electricity can be dangerous, and it is always best to err on the side of caution. If you are not familiar with electrical codes and practices, it is recommended to hire a qualified electrician to perform the installation. Firstly, grounding is absolutely critical. Ensure the receptacle is properly grounded according to NEC Article 250. This prevents electrical shock by providing a low impedance path for fault current. The grounding conductor must be connected to the equipment grounding bus in the panel board serving the receptacle. Secondly, overcurrent protection is another key element. The circuit serving the receptacle must have overcurrent protection, such as a circuit breaker or fuse, sized appropriately for the receptacle's ampacity and the conductor's ampacity is specified in NEC Article 240. This protects against overloads and short circuits. Thirdly, consider the environmental factors. For outdoor locations, weather-resistant receptacles and covers are essential per NEC 406.9. These protect against rain, snow, and other environmental elements that can damage the receptacle and create a safety hazard. Fourthly, examine the working space requirements detailed in NEC 110.26. Sufficient working space around the receptacle is needed to allow for safe access and maintenance. This includes adequate depth, width, and height for service personnel to perform their tasks safely. Fifthly, look at the height requirements. While the NEC doesn't specify a precise height for the receptacle, it must be accessible as noted in NEC 210.63. Consider the typical height for convenience, usually between 12 inches and 48 inches above the ground or platform. Sixthly, understand the use of listed equipment. Only use receptacles, boxes, and fittings that are listed by a recognized testing laboratory like UL or ETL as specified in NEC 110.3. This ensures the equipment meets safety standards and is suitable for its intended use. Seventhly, consider the voltage drop if the receptacle is far from the electrical panel. Excessive voltage drop can impair the performance of tools plugged into the receptacle. Use appropriately sized conductors to minimize voltage drop, as recommended in NEC Chapter 9, Informative Annex C. Eighthly, if the receptacle is located in a hazardous location due to the presence of flammable gases or vapors, follow the requirements in NEC Articles 500 through 516. This may require the use of explosion-proof receptacles and wiring methods. Ninthly, ensure proper wiring methods are used as described in NEC Chapter 3. Use appropriate wiring methods such as RMC, IMC, EMT, or UF cable, depending on the location and environmental conditions. Secure and support the wiring properly. 10thly, labeling is also important. Clearly label the receptacle as for HVAC equipment only to prevent misuse and inform service personnel of its intended purpose as recommended by best practices and local amendments, if any.